Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Blooming Daily. Happy Women History Month, and I am, of course, very glad to be back in the studio and to be sharing the many stories and insights and conversations we always do. So, thank you for joining us again, and thank you for joining us for this episode in particular. I am in the studio with someone I'm very excited to be recording with because when we were planning for this episode, I was thinking who would be the best person to record this episode on hormonal health with. And I was like, oh my gosh, yes, I know. So join me in welcoming Cassidy.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Welcome, Cassie. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. Yeah. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well too. I'm glad that, it's a nice Monday. It's getting warmer. And, campus is currently quiet.
Yeah.
Because we are having spring break. So, yeah, I'm doing good. Welcome again to the studio.
Thank you.
Today we will be speaking about hormonal health and how our hormones in general influence our overall health. And we picked this topic because hormonal health is something that we might not often think about because it's so internal. It's so easy for it to get overlooked. And so we thought, how can we speak about hormonal health? Because it's something that is so vital to our overall health. So I'm very excited to be speaking about hormones, what they are, some common misconceptions, how hormonal imbalance shows up in our everyday life, key hormones and their roles, even in fact how hormones impact our mental health, and practical tips for maintaining good hormonal health. But before we get into all of this, I would like Cassidy to share a bit about her work with hormones and her research in this line because she does research at Bowdoin for her honors project in this line of hormones and how it impacts, us. So, Cassidy, would you like to share some of that with us?
Yes, of course. So I'm a senior at Bowdoin, currently doing an honors project in the behavioral neuroscience lab. It's a behavioral neuroscience rat lab, and essentially the main sort of research topic of our lab is early life adversity and how that affects development and effective behaviors. So we focus on like anxiety and depression specifically as the effective behavioral phenotype in our rats, and we were able to study that like in a behavioral model. So we just look at their behavior after introducing early life adversity to them, and we essentially also look at their brain function and their like neural activity after, and we try to like make some sort of correlatory claims about like what is happening. And essentially my specific research is looking at sex differences. We also do that a lot in our labs. We look at the differences between males and females, as we know, and also the topic of this conversation, hormones can change the way you show depression and anxiety like behavior. And so our lab focuses on sex differences in behavior, and then we also look at sex differences potentially in the brain. So my research looks at how hormones affect the development of affective disorders, and I'm specifically looking at females because we've seen throughout the history of our lab that females and males present differently when exposed to early life stresses like maternal separation. And so I have been sort of looking at how if we remove like pubertal hormones, if that will change the development of like anxiety like behavior in our rat. And we're seeing that there are differences when these rats are able to go through puberty versus not able to go through puberty, or maybe they're not exposed to the same pubertal hormones. And then we're also trying to figure out like this like physiological response, what is happening with the brain? Like how can we explain these different behaviors essentially?
Wow, that sounds so vital. The work you're doing sounds so vital. And before we go on to the episode, I'm curious why you got into this research and some of the things you love the most about your research.
Yeah, I think the reason why I joined this lab was number one, I've always been really interested and passionate about like mental health issues and how we can like better improve mental health issues. And I think once I realized that this lab was dealing with affective behaviors, I was so excited to join and learn from, Jen, our PI, and also the other students in the lab. I think mental health is so important, especially in the ways in which it like disproportionately affects like marginalized communities. So I think I've kind of always been interested in that. It's the same reason why I chose to major in neuroscience. I think looking at the biological aspects of psychology is kind of like where like neuroscience slightly differs from psychology, and I think both of those topics are really interesting. So I was able to like pick a major that combined both things. And then this lab, when I found out that we were also looking at sex differences, I think not enough is paid attention to. Like a lot of early neuroscience research has focused mainly on male rats because they didn't want to introduce confounds into their research, which has kind of set like behavioral neuroscience in terms of female behavior back. And when I say like female and male, I'm specifically talking about like your reproductive organs, not obviously like identity in humans, but like in these animals, like what they have. And yeah, so that's kind of set back what we know about like variation in sex differences, like the differences between like just the plethora of things that can be different in males and females. And it's obviously a spectrum, so there's not like a one size fits all, but I think it's just set generally like female understanding of how females develop and in all these different ways, like anxiety, depression. I think it set us back. So I was interested in joining a lab that was able to sort of like add to the existing body of literature concerning, yes, female specific studies.
Yes, thank you so much. And that's really wonderful to hear. I'm glad that you are helping contribute to this really important work because, again, how can we develop drugs if we don't know how it's impacting females? How can we develop therapies? There's just so much we can do if we don't have the right knowledge. So I think this is really important work. And I also recognize that we still have a long way to go.
Yeah.
A few days ago was International Women's Day, and the theme for this year was Accelerate Action. And I really do think we need to accelerate action because, in fact, we're currently facing so many setbacks with research for females. And so I think this is important work. And I hope that we can continue to make progress in this line.
Yeah.
So now that Cassie has told us a bit about her research, we want to speak about what hormones are, like what they really are. And in simple terms, hormones are just chemical messengers produced by glands in our endocrine system, which is one of the many systems of our body. And they travel through our bloodstream and they're able to regulate various of our body functions like your metabolism, your mood, even your energy levels are controlled by your hormones. Growth is controlled by your hormones. Reproduction is controlled by your hormones. They're like your body's communication system. And so they're a pretty big deal. And again, another important reason why we should be looking at them. And Cassie, I'm curious to hear about when you started learning about hormones and the things you learned about them when you started learning about them.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the first time I ever really focused on hormones probably was in high school in our health and biology classes. They talked about them in different ways. I think biology is kind of like going into the nitty gritty of, receptors and ligands and binding and kind of like what's happening in the cell to communicate from cell to cell. So I think it was very zoomed in. And then in health classes, of course, we were learning about puberty and how your like hormones fluctuate, different types of hormones fluctuate, specifically in women's health or women's reproductive health at different times of the month. So I think that was my first introduction. It was a very general introduction. And honestly, I will say sometimes it's hard to remember the specifics of what it does, like FSH, LH, like all these different things. Like they surge at this time and they peak at this time and then they kind of like go down and decrease. A lot of the different information that's kind of hard to remember. But I would say that's my first introduction. Yeah.
And you said something important now that reminded me. I wanted to mention that although we're going to be speaking about hormones and hormonal imbalance and types of hormones and what they do, this is not a comprehensive list. We certainly cannot touch on everything that needs to be spoken about. And we're not experts, so we can't tell you, like, if we give nuggets, it's not expert advice. We're just simply having a conversation to get you to think about your hormonal health. But as always, you need to see a doctor if you feel like you're having hormonal imbalance or you're noticing things that we mentioned in the episode. But yes, again, and also there's no one size fits all. Something might be, happening in our bodies, in my body, in Cassie's body, that might not relate to you, or it might not be happening in your body. So we are all really different with different makeups and different hormonal levels. And so that's really important to know. But we really hope that you're thinking about your hormones and how they might be impacting your health. And so now that we've spoken about hormones, these are super important. They're doing lots of work in your body. There are some common misconceptions about hormones. Like, there are things people think about that aren't actually true, right? And so, Cassie, I was wondering if there are some common misconceptions about hormones that you know.
I think one of the biggest misconceptions I've encountered, especially as like a neuroscience major, is that hormones are only happening in the body. I mean, there are so many places where hormones bind to in the brain that regulate brain function and then also body functions, like this consistent cycle. For example, in my research, I'm looking at estrogen. So I'm looking at estrogen receptors in the brain. And I think even for some people, like even in thinking about hormones, they assume that it's just kind of like these steroids or these things, these signaling messages that are only moving throughout their body and only regulating things in their body. But another way that that hormones can be regulated or bodily functions can be regulated is the communication between the body and the brain. And then that can also like inform what happens in the body. So estrogen receptors are interesting to me. I'm looking at ER2, and that's located in different places in the brain. So I think that's one misconception that I think would even help people further understand that hormones can have many different ways of signaling and kind of like sending out information.
Yes, that's really important to note, and I'm really glad you said it, because yes, there are ways that hormones are working in our brains that we might not realize. And this leads to something, I had on my list that people said, people might think hormones only matter for women. But no. Hormones matter for men and women. And of course, while like estrogen and progesterone is often associated with women, people think here of these hormones, they think, oh, women. Hormones regulate health in both men and women. And so they're in our bodies, they're in our brains, and they're doing a lot for our bodies. And people think that, testosterone is only for men, because when we hear of it, we often hear of it in connection with men's health. It's essential for women's health too, women's muscle strength and energy. So hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone are important for men and women. And oftentimes there is this misconception that, oh no, they're only important for men or women. But this is a big misconception that we definitely often don't realize is a thing. Yeah. And another one I was thinking of was that people think, hormones are only about mood swings. But I'm curious to hear from your research what you found out about hormones, because of course hormones can impact mood swings. But what are other things you've seen through your research, or even just through learning about hormones, that you've seen that hormones are involved with?
Yeah, I think something else that hormones are involved with is the development, not just the time of puberty, but generally development. A lot of people, if they're exposed to sort of like any traumatic events in their life or early life stress, I think that can also affect how they sort of express hormones or excrete hormones in their blood, and like maybe the types of hormones that are typically available. Again, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a researcher, but you can imagine like if someone has their whole life had a lot of stress, they might have higher levels of cortisol in their bloodstream. So things like that. It's not just about like a period of time. It can also just be something that someone's new normal is that they have a lot of like stress hormones because they've experienced a lot of stress. So they're always operating on a slightly higher level of anxiety, things like that. So hormones can play a role in a lot of, like, not just mood swings, but also just generally long-term periods of time feeling different types of emotions. Yeah, I would say that.
Yeah, that is very true. Play a lot, they play important roles in how we show up to the world behind just our mood. For example, your energy. If your hormones can really determine the amount of energy you have, and let's say you're having really low energy, this can impact the way you show up to class, the way you show up to work, the way you show up to family functions, or the way you're interacting with your friends. So that's definitely a big one. And then even apart from mood in general, hormones, again, as we mentioned earlier, play a big role in your metabolism, in your digestion, in your immune function. In fact, you might be surprised, but hormones are also important for even your skin health. So hormones are not just about mood swings. They are such an important part of our overall health. Another misconceptions about hormones is that, hormones are things we cannot control. Like they're totally out of our control and there's nothing we can do to impact the way they show up in our bodies. But that's actually not true. And Cassie, I'm curious to hear what you think about that.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of ways, or there are a lot of things that we can do to sort of regulate hormones. That's why it's important to have access to information. I mean, I can speak from personal experience in that exercise can help you regulate stress levels and it can increase like adrenaline and all these types of things that can sort of like make you feel better and that can help you regulate like better sleep, even diet. There's a lot of growing research in the gut to brain axis sort of like line, and essentially it just talks about how your gut can so much affect like your mental health and how that like axis can play like a really large role in just generally what you're feeling or thinking. And there have been research that's shown like how changes in your gut, depending like the bacteria in your gut and how that can affect like the mental health, or the like expression of anxiety, depression in rat models, or even humans. They've done like gut research on them, and that can affect your mood as well. So that shows that there are a lot of things that you're able to do to sort of change or help or improve, like your energy levels, your sleep, your ability to sleep well, your ability to like, wake up and feel like energetic, and happy. Like those little things you can do. Like there's a lot of things that you can do to regulate your hormones essentially. And of course, it's a different degree to every person. Like some people might have to go to a dietitian and learn about like the specific information that can be effective to them, because every person is different and every person is needing something different in order to improve. But yeah, there's information out there is what I'll say.
I definitely agree with Cassie about how there are things we can do on our end to improve our hormonal health. For example, you mentioned something important, which is exercise, and exercise is a big one. It's a big one for helping with good hormonal balance, and then good nutrition, eating well. I'm going to say that we fully understand that there are certain privileges embedded in these things we're speaking about. When we speak about getting regular exercise, depending on where you live, that might be hard. We're speaking about food if you live in a community where it's mostly processed food. So we fully understand, and I want to put this out there as always, that we understand the healthcare inequity that is embedded in many of these things. And while we recognize that, we want to keep speaking about that so that if this is something within your reach, you can strive to eat better, to exercise better, to try to get quality sleep. Again, depending on how many jobs you're working, it might be harder to get quality sleep, but things like nutrition, exercise, quality sleep can help to regulate your hormones naturally without you having to take certain pills or having to go through major surgery or any of that. So yes, another misconception is you can't control your hormones, but actually there are things you can do, there are lifestyle choices you can make that can impact your hormones. The last common misconception we're going to speak about is that if you have hormonal imbalance, you're going to know immediately. But this is actually not true. And I say I'm curious to know if you know anything about hormonal imbalance, but it has been shown that hormonal imbalances can develop gradually and they might not show up at first. It might be after a while you notice, but I'm curious to hear from you, Cassie.
Yeah, I've never really thought about. I think I've more thought about hormone imbalances as something that can happen more gradually. I guess because of the information I've been exposed to. Yeah, I'm thinking about even the transition from like adolescence to adulthood and all the life changes that occurred during that time. And I'm also thinking like you can imagine why stressful periods of time, like going to college for the first time, having your first job outside college, if that's something that you're interested in, like those things might be like dramatic changes in your life, and they also might cause you to like feel differently. And I imagine that might cause in some stressful circumstances like changes in your hormonal and also just reproductive health as well. Like that is one plot, like thinking about by the time you go through menopause versus the time you go through puberty, I can imagine those things slowly changing over time as well. So yeah, I think that I've been exposed to information regarding the gradual changes in hormones and also how like different types of stressors can change those things. I'm not sure what you were thinking in terms of gradual versus immediate.
Yes, definitely. It's definitely gradual, but some people might feel like, oh, if I have hormonal imbalance, I would just know immediately. But the reality is that it's not like that. You can go many months or even years of having hormonal imbalance and not know. And one of the reasons is that sometimes we get used to the symptoms. We get used to fatigue. We get used to weight fluctuations. Like, you might be surprised, but weight fluctuations can be a symptom of hormonal imbalance. We get used to feeling anxious, or we get used to having digestive problems without realizing that they might be hormone related. So many times it's important to check these things beyond, oh, I'm just like feeling really I'm feeling really weak. Maybe it's just because I didn't sleep well last night. Having an in-depth review of your health when you go to a doctor or when you see someone like that is really important, because many of these things might be hormone related. And because we can live even while we're having hormonal imbalance, we might not realize that we're experiencing it. So yeah, so that was the final misconception we're touching about, that hormonal imbalance, the people think hormonal imbalance is something that you find out immediately, but no, it's something that can happen gradually and something that we might not realize. So now that we've spoken about that, we can't have this whole conversation without mentioning key hormones and their roles. I know we've already mentioned some of them throughout the episode up to this point, but I believe we need to dedicate some time, even if it's just a few minutes, actually speak about these key hormones and their roles. So what Cassie and I will just do now, we'll just call out some and speak about what they do. We're just going to mention some of the key ones. Of course, again, this list is not a comprehensive list. There are many hormones in our body, but we can't cover all of them in one episode. So we're just going to mention a key few ones that we think are important. And we're going to start with cortisol, the infamous cortisol. And Cassie, I'm going to hand it over to you. What do you think cortisol is and what's its role in the body?
So cortisol, I believe, is like the most well-known sort of stress hormone. So it helps the body respond to stress, and tends to increase in moments where you're experiencing stress. Yeah.
Yeah. So that is what cortisol does. It's a big hormone that people are aware of, because if you Google stress, you're going to see, oh, cortisol this, cortisol that. But also in small amounts, actually, cortisol can help with, your energy, your focus, and your immune function. So while chronic stress leads to excess cortisol in the body, cortisol in itself can help with your energy and with your focus. And another thing that sometimes happens with chronic stress leading to excess cortisol is that this can cause weight gain, this can cause like sleep issues, this can cause more anxiety. So yes, this is an important hormone, and that's why we decided to start with it. Another one is insulin, the very infamous insulin that, we hear about. Insulin shots, insulin this, what's your blood sugar level, and insulin that. So, Cassie, what do you know about insulin?
Yeah, I think just the basics, like insulin is important for regulating like sugar in the blood. And I know that like too high or too low can have like different effects on your blood sugar, and I think that it's been correlated with diabetes.
Exactly. Yes, this insulin is made by your pancreas, and like Cassie said, it controls your blood sugar level. Too much insulin can lead to insulin resistance, which I wish we could go into that on this episode, but that's going to take some time to dig into. But it can lead to insulin resistance, it can lead to diabetes, it can lead to weight gain, and then too little insulin too can also hurt the body. So like as I said, too much or too little can become an issue in our bodies, which is why having the right amount of insulin for our individual bodies is important, with just even how we're able to show up to the world again with our energy levels, and how we're able to break down sugar and all of that. And an important, it's just an important hormone for the quality of our life. So insulin is our second main hormone we'll be speaking about. The third one is thyroid hormones, and we're just going to call them T3 and T4. These are metabolism controllers, but before I speak more about them, I'd love to hear what you know about them, Cassie.
Honestly, I'm pretty unfamiliar with thyroid hormones. I know they play a role in like metabolism and weight loss and things like that, but I haven't really been exposed to information about it. So I'm curious to hear what it's about.
Yeah, definitely. I know that unlike insulin and cortisol, thyroid hormones aren't as, I don't know how to say they aren't as well known, but they aren't spoken about at the same level those other two are. So yes, thyroid hormones regulate metabolism, energy levels, and your body temperature. So they are a big deal, because if your body temperature is not regulated, that can be an issue. Too much thyroid hormone, which is called hyperthyroidism, can cause rapid heartbeats, can cause weight loss, can cause anxiety, while too little thyroid hormone, which is hypothyroidism, can lead to fatigue, weight gain, and even brain fog. So yes, having too little of that can lead to brain fog. So as you can see, and I don't know if you've noticed, but there's been a pattern with energy levels. Your hormones play a big role in your energy levels. So if you're thinking, wow, like, I didn't know this, like I didn't know how much my hormones impact your energy levels, this is something you can definitely take some time after listening to this episode. Sit down, do some more searching, do some more research on your own about hormones and energy levels, because they play an important role just because of their makeup and the way they communicate between glands in our body, and the way they communicate with our brain. So hormones are super important for energy levels, and it's no exception for these thyroid hormones. The next one we're going to be speaking about is melatonin, an important hormone for sleep. And before I go on, I wanted to hear if you have any thoughts on melatonin, Cassie.
Yeah, I guess the same thing as you said. I know that it helps regulate sleep for people, and I know that too much or too little can affect your like circadian rhythm. But that's the gist of it. Yeah.
It is a very important hormone for our sleep wake cycle, like Cassie said. And it's interesting to know that blue light from our screens can suppress melatonin production, making it hard for you to fall asleep. So again, going back to the misconception we had about, you can really control your hormones. Even things like blue light can impact your hormonal levels, which is why it's so recommended not to use your phone right before you sleep, or your devices, because this exposure to blue light can impact your melatonin levels, and it can make you struggle to sleep. So a well-regulated sleep schedule needs a good amount of melatonin balance in the body. And when there's melatonin imbalance, you might notice you're struggling to fall asleep, you're struggling to stay asleep. And so this is something to definitely keep in mind, that melatonin is an important hormone. We're going to now speak about estrogen. And again, we've touched on estrogen earlier, but I still would love to hear, Cassie, what you think estrogen does.
Yeah, so estrogens are female sex hormones, but of course, this is not like it's not specific only to females, but they help with things like play a large role in development and the like formation of like sex hormones and the function of reproductive systems and a lot of aspects of like sex health. Yeah, so I would say like they come up a lot when we think about menopause and puberty, yeah, and reproductive development essentially.
Yes, that's very correct. And just briefly adding on to what Cassie said, they also regulate your skin. Estrogen also regulates your skin elasticity, your brain, bone strength, and even your brain function. And having estrogen imbalance can contribute to having mood swings, irregular periods. Yep, irregular periods, and hot flashes. So estrogen are really important. And just following closely with estrogen, we're going to speak about progesterone, which is sometimes called a balancing hormone, and it works very closely with estrogen to regulate the menstrual cycle and support pregnancy. So it is a very important hormone. It also helps calm the nervous system, and low progesterone can result in having sleep disturbances because it's involved in sleep. Low progesterone can result in anxiety, and it can just result in very irregularities in the menstrual cycle. So progesterone, just like estrogen, is a really important hormone. The final one we're going to speak about is testosterone, which is sometimes called, the energy hormone, or like the muscle builder hormone. So, Cassie, I'm curious to know what you know about testosterone.
I mainly just know that it is important for mainly male development and function. Mm-hmm. I know it's important for like sexual development, and fertility and things like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It is very important for male development, but it's also essential for women, like we mentioned earlier, and it supports muscle growth, it supports your bone density, it supports your energy levels. And so low testosterone can lead to fatigue, it can lead to mood swings, it can lead to even decreased motivation. Yeah, you'll be surprised that low testosterone can lead to decreased motivation. Again, we've said like even decreased energy levels. So this is really important to note, and why we're mentioning these things, because we think it's so important to be aware of, of all that can happen when you're having, not all, because we've not touched on all that can happen, but some of the things that can happen when you're facing hormonal imbalance. And so now we're going to just speak about practical tips for hormonal health. And, we are ending with this. We're ending with this section because, like we've mentioned before, hormonal imbalances can lead to constant fatigue. We mentioned that it can lead to sleep problems. It can lead to, we mentioned a lot that, hormones play an important role with your skin health. So having hormonal imbalances can lead to acne and other skin issues. It can lead to digestive issues. It can lead to sudden weight gain or weight loss. It can lead to just irritability. And so hormones are really important, and we've mentioned how this can show up in our everyday life. So now we're going to speak about practical tips, like what are things we can do to help with our hormonal health. And Cassie, I'm wondering, what are the first things that come to your mind?
Yeah, so some of the things that we've kind of talked about, but obviously if you are able, some of the things that I try to target, and I think have been helpful to me, is diet, exercise, and sleep. Sleep being the hardest because, college is rough and things, life gets busy, but like just trying to keep on track. And anytime you get off track, trying to like recalibrate. So if I know that I got too little sleep, I try to make sure that for the next few days I'd be a little bit more consistent about my sleep. Consistency is really important. I think some people, one of the misconceptions about sleep too that I think I've come in contact with is like, oh, if I get like 13 hours, I'll be great. But I've seen a lot of studies that focus on like just consistency, like anywhere from like 7 to 9, and making sure you're doing that consistently can help your body re-regulate to, you know, like consistent levels of hormones as opposed to like 13 and then 5 and then 13 and then 5, like things like that.
Yeah, definitely sleep. And sleep is a big one. It's definitely like I can definitely relate to not getting enough sleep. So I know how I feel after going for days without getting good sleep. And like you said, even when you get, let's say, you've been getting 5 hours of sleep and then you then get 10 hours one day, it's not just going to undo the effects of getting 5 hours of sleep. So consistently, even if you're constantly getting 7 hours of sleep, that's better than getting 5 hours and then trying to get 10 hours on the weekend. Just the way our body works with consistency. So that's really important. Again, we've mentioned this diet. Diet is very important. Reducing the sugary and processed foods you're eating will really help to keep your insulin stable. And just like Cassie beautifully mentioned earlier, your gut health. So reducing processed foods can really help with your gut health and eating more healthy fats. I remember an episode we had in 2023 where Julie Gray spoke about how fats can seem to get a lot of bad rep, but healthy fats are important and they will help with our hormonal production. So fats like avocados, nuts, seeds are really important. And then staying hydrated will help support your metabolism. You know what's so funny? Literally, as I was speaking about staying hydrated, Cassie was taking a sip of water. So it's just so perfect. Staying hydrated will really help with your hormones. And then another one is trying to find ways to manage stress. This will really help with lowering your cortisol levels, like working out and being around people you love and just all of that. That will really help with your hormonal levels. And again, this list is inexhaustible, but if you're just thinking, okay, the quick things, your sleep, your diet, your stress management, the things you do for stress management, whether you're staying hydrated, all of this can really impact your hormones because, like we said, hormonal imbalances can show up in various ways around us. And, you know, something that we could have touched on, but instead I'm just going to leave you with this for you to try to do research on this because, again, this is so inexhaustible, is even environmental factors. You know, we have so many endocrine disruptors around us, you know, like plastics, pesticides, personal care products. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. But again, this is inexhaustible. So if you can take, you know, just thinking about what are the things that might be impacting my hormonal health here, because there's so many of them and there's so many ways that this shows up in our lives. But again, this episode was just to make you ask, okay, how might my hormones be impacting my health? I've been feeling a lot of fatigue. I've been feeling a lot of X, Y, Z. I've been feeling, I know my stress levels have been up. My anxiety levels, I'm having acne. Oh, should I see a doctor? Should I go for a test? Should I do this and all of that? So this is something that we definitely wanted to make you think about because hormones show up in our lives in more ways than we realize. And so before we wrap up the episode, I would love to hand over the final word to you, Cassie, about hormones. What is something you're hoping that our listeners take away from this episode as they're thinking about hormones?
I think something that I've been thinking about throughout the whole time that we've been speaking is how much of a privilege it is to even have the ability to take the time to think about your health in this way. And I think that focusing on like lifestyle choices, exercise, sleep, and even vitamins or you know, diet, like those are things that are a privilege. Sometimes you don't have access to the time or the money to kind of like build these things or pour into these things, but also I think it's so important to have access to information because it's another privilege to have access to information. So the fact that we're even talking about this, and hopefully there's someone out there that hasn't really thought about, oh, like if I try to invest more in like slightly more healthy foods, like if I can. Yeah, I've been thinking about privilege and access and how it's so important that our healthcare systems work to provide everyone with the opportunity to pour into themselves in those ways. And hormones are so important, and we don't know how different life factors can sort of like change your hormone like levels. So to end off, I guess I would just say we recognize it's a privilege. We honestly encourage the healthcare system and the US system as a whole to like pour into these and allow people to have access to all of these things, because I think that's the right, and everyone should be able to do things that can promote their mental well-being and physical well-beings.
Amazing, amazing. That is where we'll end off today. Thank you so much, Cassie, for joining me
Thank you so
on
much.
today's episode. And thank you all for tuning in. It's always such a pleasure to be in the studio, to be sharing these stories, to be sharing these amazing insights from our guests with you. And we hope we will see you in the next episode. Remember to share this episode with other people you know would find this impactful, which is, again, everyone, because everyone needs to be thinking about your hormones. And if you have any questions, concerns, hopes and dreams, anything for this about this episode, please send us a message on any of our social media platforms or write in the podcast platform you're listening to, or on our website, bloomingdaily.org. So, yeah. Thank you again for joining us. We'll see you in the next episode. Take care. And again, happy Women's History Month. Bye.